Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz. Dr. John R. Lott is an economist and a world recognized expert on guns and crime. He served as the senior advisor for research and statistics in the Office of Justice Programs and then the Office of Legal Policy in the U.S. Department of Justice during the first Trump administration. He has held research or teaching positions at multiple academic institutions. He's the former chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission as well. Holds a Ph.D. in economics from UCLA. He's also the president and the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center, which you should bookmark online at crimeresearch.org. He's the author of numerous books on the Second Amendment and gun control, including More Guns, Less Crime, The War on Guns, and his most recent, Gun Control Myths. Today, he joins us to talk about the government using the threat of domestic terrorism to strip away American citizens' rights for non-criminal activity. Yeah, it's a big deal. And John Lott joins us coming up here on Strictly Speaking. This episode of Strictly Speaking with Bob Frantz is brought to you by Get More Tank. What is it? Get More Tank is a fuel catalyst that's going to save you money every single month on gas. Get More Tank is a tablet with active ingredients that add big mileage to every tank. Made in America, the Get More Tank formula has been used for decades by trucking companies and heavy industry. Now the Get More Tank formula is available to people like you and me. Get More Tank works in any gas or diesel engine, cleans your engine, lowers emissions, and you'll feel improved engine performance every time you step on the gas. Get More Tank works for cars, trucks, boats, motorcycles, four-wheelers, mowers, and blowers, contractors, electricians, plumbers, painters, lawn service companies. Get More Tank is going to save you money and extend the life of your engines. If you're an owner-operator running your rig around town or across the country, Get More Tank is going to save you money too. A 5-pack on sale only at getmoretank.com for just $22 plus shipping. Use promo code Bob and get 10% off of that. Save your money and get better engine performance at getmoretank.com. That's getmoretank.com. John, good to see you again. Thanks for making the time. How are you?
Doing great, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I wish I didn't have to have you on because anytime I have you on, it's because something really bad has happened or is in the process of happening. And you've uncovered it and you've written about it and we need to talk about it. So one of these days it'd be great just to have you on to talk about football or something.
Okay.
But But John, so we're going to dive into this now. The new director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who's an interesting person in her own right, given her experience in the military and given her experience as a Democrat, joining the Trump administration as DNI set a lot of tongues to wagging, and it got a lot of Democrats to be very critical of her. In large part because I think they were afraid of what have written about here on your website at Crime Research. She blew the whistle and declassified some important documents and a plan that I think they would prefer, they being the former Biden administration officials, would not like you to know about or not like us to know about. A plan to strip away Americans' rights in what is perceived to be, or what they portrayed as being, the ongoing threat of domestic terrorism. So
Right.
why don't you start by laying out the quote strategic implementation plan for countering domestic terrorism?
Well, in June 2021, the Biden administration had publicly put out a plan dealing with domestic terrorism. That those documents dealt with criminal activity, and everybody wants the government to be able to go after people who are threatening violence or are engaged in violence in some way. But
Mhm.
what Tulsi Gabbard put out was kind of the classified portion of this. And what's startling, as you point out, is how it's not just criminal activity that they were going after; they were going after non-criminal activity. And it kind of puts in stark contrast a lot of the leaks and whistleblowers that came forward during the Biden administration. So, for example, we had FBI officials going and writing down license plate numbers for people who were at school board meetings. Or we had, the Richmond office for the FBI going and talking about spying on Catholic activities for those Catholics who, let's say, supported the Latin Mass. You had a number of other types of people that they had identified, people who would go and use symbolism like 2A, or write the right to keep and bear arms in their social media posts, or put up things like the Betsy Ross flag, the flag from the American Revolution with the 13 stars in a circle, or the
Mhm.
Gadsden flag. Um, you know, uh, when those types of whistleblower leaks came out, the Biden administration would point to the public document that they had that said, look, all we're trying to do, we're only interested in criminal activity, people who are threatening, uh, violence against others, let's say with regard to school board meetings. The whistleblowers or the FBI agents who had come forward said, look, they seem to just want me to write down everybody's license plate if they said anything that was against trans or whatever. But the media pretty much accepted the Biden administration claims that they were just interested in individuals who were engaged in some type of violence. But, this makes it clear that, in fact, those whistleblowers were accurately reporting the broader concerns, that they were going after much broader people. And look, there are many other things that have gone on. There have been real consequences for some of the people. You had the lawyers, for example, who worked for Trump, who were what they call debanked, which means that financial institutions would close their accounts, refuse to go and do business with them. We'd seen this type of activity before, starting in the Obama administration under Operation Choke Point, where businesses that the Obama administration didn't favor, such as people in the oil industry or the coal industry or in the firearm industry, would have pressure put on financial institutions not to go and do business with them. Go try doing a business without having a checking account or a financial institution that will handle the checks or credit cards for your customers. Are there workarounds? Yeah. Now, Trump ended that. Biden restarted it. But when you read these documents, it's clear that now he was expanding it, not just going after companies that he didn't like, but going after individuals that they were targeting. So, we've heard stories about how, as I said, lawyers who worked for Trump, like John Eastman. Eastman had his Bank of America account closed, uh, without any notice, without any ability to go and appeal. He had his account then at USAA closed, again, without any notice. Now, can an individual survive without checks, without credit cards, without a bank account? Yeah, I mean, people can live just with cash. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult. And when you read the document that was put out, that was declassified by Tulsi Gabbard, the strategy was clear that they just wanted to make life so difficult for those individuals that it would restrict their ability to go and do things that the Biden administration didn't approve of. And even beyond all that, they spend a lot of time in this document talking about disinformation and about how the United States needed to take the lead worldwide among governments in going after disinformation. So while there are two times in the document that they mention protecting freedom of expression, there are many more times that they talk about controlling disinformation. And, it kind of reminds me, after J.D. Vance was in Germany, and you had the different European leaders come out after his big speech that he gave there, where they were saying things like, you have to engage in censorship in order to protect free speech, or you have to engage in censorship in order to protect democracy. That's exactly the way this document that Gabbard declassified reads. And it's not just kind of social media, though they talk a lot about social media and putting pressure on social media organizations to censor people that they didn't like. They talk about the accord after the New Zealand Christchurch shooting there, which goes and tries to go and censor what is regarded as hate speech there, which mainly seem to be directed against people on the left. But that's, I could go on, but it, the thing that bothers me the most is, I mean, the censorship, going after non-criminal things. But beyond all that is that the only types of things that are mentioned in any of these things, or the links or the sources that they cite, are basically people on the right. There's like no balance at all. And I suppose that's not too surprising given what the Obama but with the Biden administration viewed as disinformation.
Well, you could probably have stuck with the first one there. I mean, it was the Obama administration part three, because I don't think anybody believes Joe Biden was actually making any decisions there. I think it was all very clear. But I want to go back. That's a lot to try to process at the beginning here. I want to go back to the plan itself, the strategic implementation plan for countering domestic terrorism, which was put forth by the Biden administration. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Who signed off on it?
I mean, I don't, there's no specific name that I saw in it, but there's a lot of government agencies. I mean, it's not just the Department of Justice. You have Homeland Security, you have the FBI involved, you have even the Department of Education, you have USAID that's involved, you have the State Department. Uh, it's pretty much across the whole administration, it seems that they have concerns in using the power of different agencies. Even as I say, even the Department of Education, they talk about setting up educational programs in schools so as to allow children to have some resistance to the
Mhm.
disinformation that they might hear. Um, it's extremely broad what's covered by this, and each of the
Yeah,
points.
the reason I'm asking who's responsible for it is because obviously there needs to be some kind of, accountability for it. And I'm not saying, throw people in jail. There are a lot of things I think that happened in the most recent presidential administration, the Biden administration, that some people should be in handcuffs. But we're talking about something that is extremely important, and that is dealing with domestic terrorism. It's not something that should not exist. It's not
Right.
something that should not be targeted. We have to recognize, if there are genuine grave threats that are generating from within, the United States, we need to know about that. And I want our intelligence agencies and the FBI. That's the reason I asked who was looking at this. I want in the DOJ, I want all of these agencies to be aware of that. But if they are concerning themselves with all of this ideological stuff instead of actual domestic terror threats, if people we don't like, people who like you said use 2A in any of their social media posts, now they're on our radar. If a guy who likes the Second Amendment or the Gadsden flag is on the radar of the national intelligence agencies, well then somebody else who should be on their radar is not. They're paying attention to the wrong thing. So I want to
Right.
know, what was going on in countering real domestic terrorism while they were making life miserable for people who posted about guns or who went to school board meetings and said things that they don't like.
I mean, look, Bob, your point is exactly right. There's only so many FBI agents. There's only so many lawyers in the Department of Justice. There's only so many government agents that we have that can go and deal with these things. And to the extent that you're having them go after people who are non-criminals, who are putting out social media messages or others that the Biden administration disagrees with, those are people then who aren't going after what we would regard as real threats. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's something like 80 FBI agents had been detailed to going and monitoring social media, basically from people on the right, where they would go and put pressure on social media outlets not to go, to take people, to deplatform individuals that were there. I mean, I posts that I put out were frozen on places like Twitter and Facebook. So, and it makes me wonder when, you know, given reading this document and seeing focuses on things like the Christchurch attack that was there. I mean, one of the things that got me censored was the fact that I had put out that the Christchurch mass murderer was a socialist, left winger, environmentalist who hated minorities because they had too many kids and that they were damaging the environment. and that his ideal form of government was the communist Chinese government. Now the mass media wanted to paint this guy as a right winger. Maybe I'm just very isolated and don't deal with a lot of conservatives, but there are not a lot of conservatives that, at least I know, who think that the ideal form of government is communist China, who think that people having too many kids is the big threat to the world that's there. Um, but but when I put that out, uh, what happened was my Twitter account was locked until agreed to remove that and apologize.
What year was that, John?
Boy, I know it's been a few years. It's probably been,
It was pre Elon's takeover of Twitter.
oh yeah, well before that.
Okay, that's what I
And
wanted to clarify.
right, no, well before that. And then
Well,
I wrote,
the reason that matters too, John, if I may, the reason that matters is it's one thing for the government, and I want to get into a little bit more specific about what you wrote in your article about this revelation by Tulsi Gabbard. But the reason I bring it up is it's one thing to know that the government is viewing people who are engaging in non-criminal behavior, and that's a direct quote you had here, that the DOJ, the FBI, and DHS, Homeland Security, were all directed to target incidents of concerning
right,
non-criminal behavior.
right,
They didn't just do this themselves. They brought in, either by, under duress or not, I don't know, but they brought in the social media platforms. Prior to Elon buying X, Twitter was even worse than Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg in its willingness to cooperate with or collaborate or collude with government agencies that were trying to strip the people of their rights to be heard, to strip the rights of people to learn from other people by way of these Twitter and other social media platforms.
right.
That's a big deal.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, what one can only imagine what impact that had on elections. For example, I mean, it's not just the fact that they would go and censor the New York Post story on the Hunter Biden laptop, but they would censor or throttle posts that people had put out on a whole range of political issues that would make it so that other people would be less informed than they would have been otherwise. Um, so, and this is just one example because the Biden administration wanted to make it look like terrorism was a threat from the right. And so when you'd go and put out something like the El Paso mass murderer was another environmentalist who was a socialist and had similar views to the Christchurch mass murderer, that would be censored. There are other mass public shootings that also had environmentalists that were similar. You have the Buffalo mass murder, the grocery store attacker there, and so they want to go and create this narrative that the terrorist actions are from the right, and would censor any type of discussions that were there that would try to point out that, look, you have all these environmentalists who are doing these things. And of course, we saw this in other ways too. I mean, the Covenant school shooter, the Biden administration took control of her diaries and refused to release them to the public. Um, and, they were worried, it turns out from things that have come out since then, that they were worried that there would be some backlash against trans individuals. I have no desire to go after trans individuals per se, but it's kind of hard to ignore the fact that they disproportionately commit these types of mass murders. And to me, it's not too surprising given the high suicide rate that exists there and how many of these mass murderers are suicidal but want to go and get attention before they kill themselves. But you know, people need to know this type of stuff. You don't want to go and demonize whole groups of people, but it's useful for people to know. And surely, when it's the other side that's there, the media will report it extensively. But it's useful. I mean, it's hard for me to see, given all the media coverage for an attack like that, or some of these other attacks, why we don't want to know the motivation for these mass murders.
Yeah, that's a great point. If they really are concerned about terrorism, how about getting to the real reason? How about getting to the core intention and what their motivations are, and instead of this ideological game? You know what's really kind of scary, John, is if the election in November had gone a different way, um, clearly Tulsi Gabbard would not be a part of the current administration, and we would never know any of these things. I kind of wonder exactly, and it makes me wonder how many other things like this have been covered up, and not just from the Biden years, but at any point in the previous. I guess like what I'm asking you is, how rare do you think this type of policy is in the federal government? And can we reasonably be assured that this won't happen anymore? Because Tulsi Gabbard is blowing the whistle. Actually, whistleblowers blew the whistle, and Tulsi Gabbard is now, revealing this and declassifying this information. How much do we have to be concerned about the government targeting us either for ideological reasons or purposes or anything else without just cause?
No, you bring up a very important point, and it's important that people like you are covering this. One of the things that's kind of disappointed me is how little news coverage this declassified report by Tulsi Gabbard has gotten. None of the legacy media has covered it at all. Even places like Fox News hasn't covered it at all. Um,
I haven't seen it.
y-
I haven't seen it anywhere except you. You wrote it. I
right,
read your article. I read your article on it, John. That's crazy. I mean,
right. Well, I
this
mean,
is a pretty dramatic. This is a pretty dramatic revelation here that Americans who were not committing crimes, by definition, and in the language of this directive from the administration to all of these agencies to target people who were not engaging in incidents of non-criminal behavior,
right.
non-criminal behavior being treated as if they're criminals, as if they're potentially domestic terrorists. John, this should be covered from end to end on all political. I mean, journalistic outlets, and I haven't seen it anywhere except for what you wrote.
Well, thanks. I mean, I guess I'm just a nerd who reads things late at night on a Saturday night on stuff. But it's just, look, if we're going to stop this from happening again, people have to know it happened to begin with. So I'm
Yeah,
glad there are people like you out there. There are a couple conservative places like the Daily Caller and the Washington Examiner who covered this, but they missed. Maybe the document's too long. I don't know. Maybe there's so much else that's going on, but they missed what I think is the most crucial part, and that unlike the original public document that they put out in 2021, as you keep saying, this was going after non-criminal activity that was there. That to me is a river, crossing a river too far. It's just, it makes a huge difference between whether you're going after criminals or non-criminals in terms of actions that they're taking. And, uh, you know, I don't know why. Yeah, the only place that I know of that's covered this is just this week, just the news, because of the piece that I had at Real Clear Politics, uh, went and covered it. But that's it. And so it's important that people like you are covering this. So I appreciate that.
well, yeah. I mean, it is important to get it out
But
there
nobody needs
because
to take my word for it. On our website at crimeresearch.org, I have a link to the underlying document that's there. People can read it themselves. And I encourage people to do it because I
I hope
think
they
they'll be
do.
surprised.
Yeah, I hope they do. I'm going to read a couple of lines here from what you wrote in summarizing this. The Biden administration obliterated the line between lawful expression and criminal intent by encouraging federal agencies to monitor speech that involved no criminal activity. And then skipping ahead, despite repeated public denials, it followed an explicit policy of identifying people based solely on their political views. It's the kind of thing, John, and I don't have guests like you on just sit here and just play politics all day. This is not what this is about. This is about protecting the rights of the people that listen to my radio show every day, and the people that probably read a lot of your work. The concern that I have here is that if this were reversed, this is that game of whataboutism nobody really likes to do. But can you imagine if the current administration had a policy and if it was revealed to the people, and it would have been covered a lot differently than what this is being, or not, covered or not covered. But if the current administration had a policy of targeting people on the left for leftist phrases on social media, for leftist statements made at school board meetings, or any of the other things that you're
Right.
talking about, and started punishing them, started, canceling their accounts, debanking them. If a lawyer who represents, Letitia James, or a lawyer had represented Hillary Clinton or anybody else in any legal wranglings, had been debanked the way John Eastman was. I mean, you can imagine what kind of a firestorm that would be. But because it's happening in the direction it is, we hear these proverbial crickets. Nobody really cares. That's
Right.
that's that's a very dangerous thing.
I think it's maybe even worse than that because not only is there crickets, but at least on what's been revealed here, but a lot of the people on the left are accusing Trump of doing the very stuff themselves in terms of censorship and what have you. And yet Trump has, as far as I can tell, been by far the most transparent presidency that we've ever had, just in terms of the documents that they've declassified and eliminating these different bureaus that have been set up throughout the government to go and censor speech. It's not like he's eliminated these bureaus and set up new ones that are there. uh, you just had last week Marco Rubio, when he was in a cabinet meeting, and say that he had discovered this bureau within the State Department where they had been monitoring American social media posts. So why is the State Department monitoring American citizens' social media posts in the United States? I mean, it's hard to even think of why that's even in their purview. And he was saying that one of the people at that cabinet meeting was one of the people that the State Department had put together a dossier on and was monitoring and classifying that person's social media posts. Rubio didn't reveal the name of the person who was at the cabinet meeting there, but you have people, presumably a cabinet member, somebody who became a cabinet member, who was being spied on and kept documents on by the Biden administration. That's just outrageous. I mean, what consequences did he face? Were his social media posts censored as a result of that? It's obviously somebody who is a high profile in some way. And why should the government be putting its thumb on his type of activity or her type of activity that was occurring?
Yeah, and of course, there is no answer to that. They shouldn't be. Is the bottom line, and if we want to go back just a little bit to prior to the first Trump term, we go back to the Obama term. And what year was it? 2009, 2010? When was it that the Obama administration kind of first started this by targeting um, individuals and groups that had certain symbols or certain phrasing in their organizations, like the 912 Project? Groups that were essentially considered to be more conservative leaning, they were targeted not by ATF and FBI, but by IRS.
Right.
And
Well, you
they
had the
they harassed
IRS
a lot
not
of this. And
giving.
this started way back then.
Right. Well, I mean, after the 2010 election, you had the IRS refusing to give tax exempt status to nonprofits that were set up uh, to go and deal with different types of issues that the Obama administration didn't approve of. They basically prevented them and put them at a disadvantage relative to similar organizations that were on the left. Um, you know, obviously, I mean, who
And
knows?
that didn't and that
Who-
wasn't that wasn't in concern for safety of Americans. We're talking about Tea
Right,
Party groups, people walking around and protesting high taxes and mandated insurance and other things like that. These weren't terrorist groups, but they were treated like them. And I think that probably set the table for what we saw in what I kind of just in passing said at the beginning of our segment here, that the Biden years were simply the third term of the Obama administration.
right. No, I mean, you make an excellent point. And, one can only imagine what impact that may have had on things like the 2012 election or the 2014 election, where the government's essentially putting its thumb on the scale to go and put certain types of political groups at a disadvantage that they
Mhm.
disagree with, at a disadvantage relative to other ones that were there. So, it's been for well over a decade or more that we've had the government involved in various different ways in elections in order to try to help out one side or the other. Unfortunately, even during the Trump administration, during the 2020 election, you had, you know, Trump wasn't able to clear out and fix things in the FBI. You had the FBI reaching out to social media in order to try to uh, stop information like the Hunter Biden laptop. You know, fortunately, this time it's very different. I mean, one of the big problems that Trump had during his first term was as an olive branch to the Bushes. He let George W. Bush appoint pretty much everybody other than the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. And he let Jeb Bush appoint virtually everybody in the Department of Education other than the Secretary of Education there. And I worked in the Department of Justice, and one of the things that was shocking to me is not only, I mean, you kind of expected that the civil service people would be on the left, but the Bush people who were in the Department of Justice, they hated Trump just as much as the Democratic civil service people did. People like Rosenthal and stuff like that. I mean, one of the reasons
Mhm.
why they let the uh, the Russian collusion story go on in the investigation is that they, I believe, strongly just disliked Trump. And I can give you stories of people that I worked with there that had basically been early appointees in the Department of Justice. Christopher Wray, I think many times he kind of revealed his political biases that were there. But the people now, Cash Patel and Dan Bongino, people that I know some, they have a huge job ahead of them to kind of restructure and make it so that the FBI isn't going to be so politically biased in the future.
Yeah, and I want to kind of go forward and backwards with that. I want to make sure that it is not as biased politically in the future, but I want some semblance of justice for those who were harmed in the past. Is that something that the current leadership can do? That Cash Patel, Bongino, Bondi, can they do anything for those who were victimized by these policies from the federal, different administration, but it's still the federal government? The last time around, people who were debanked, people whose accounts got canceled, people who were had their First Amendment rights taken away from them, at least the right to be heard in the public, town square, if you will, that
Right.
is, social media. That's the real thing. Is there needs to be some accountability, and there needs to be some sort of recompense for those who are harmed.
I talked to John Eastman a little while ago. He's a friend. He told me that based on this new document that Tulsi Gabbard had declassified, he was going to go and do a Freedom of Information Act request to find out exactly the links that were there. There may be some type of legal action. But look, the damage that the Biden
What happened
administration.
to him, by the way, John? Before you go on, what happened to Eastman? What things did he suffer?
Well, he's been debarred. He's had millions of dollars in legal costs that he's had to bear to go and deal with debarment and other types of actions that have been taken against him. He's had criminal cases brought against him. Some number of them have been dropped, but I believe he was involved in Atlanta and other places.
Mhm.
The notion of going after lawyers who go and give advice to their clients. I mean, one can disagree with it. I assume half the lawyers disagree with the other half of the lawyers in cases that they're involved with. But that's the reason why we have a court process there to have the courts try to figure out who's right and who's wrong. You want people, lawyers, not to be afraid to go and give the best legal advice that they can to their clients. Unfortunately, what's happened, and we saw this many times over recent years, is that lawyers basically have been threatened and have refused, in the 2020 election to go and represent Trump and his legal challenges that were there. Uh, you had some brave individuals like John Eastman who had decided, despite all that, that they were going to do their jobs. But, their lives have been completely upended as a result of that. I don't think now you can practice law any place. Um, and, it's just, if you wipe out all the brave lawyers that are there and have cowed the other ones, how can one side even engage in any type of action to defend their actions when the government comes after them?
Yeah, well, there isn't a way. John, I want to talk about the involvement of other countries. You wrote about this part too in the plan that Tulsi Gabbard went ahead and declassified. The plan calls for the U.S. government joining forces with other Western countries and forming partnerships with private industry companies to control the spread of disinformation. So a layman might look at that and say, well, that sounds an awful lot like globalism to me. And I think that's probably pretty doggone accurate because that was my first thought is if they're partnering with other countries to literally silence the viewpoints of American citizens,
Right.
that's a globalist attempt to take away American citizens' rights, right?
Right. I mean, we have to be very thankful that the election turned out the way it did. Before the election, the Biden administration was giving its at least tacit approval to the European Union with its different information type rules that it has to threaten to go impose large fines on places like X if they allowed information even about US elections that the Europeans thought was somehow inaccurate. Obviously, they had a very similar worldview to things about what was disinformation to what the Biden administration had. But in places like the UK and Canada and Australia, we have people being put in jail for their social media posts. You have people, literally thousands of people. In the UK, you have somebody who may have retweeted a video of Muslims rioting in the UK, and you know, nobody's saying that it was false. Nobody was saying that it was misleading in any way, but just the very fact that they would retweet that would be regarded as a crime. Uh, I assume if we had had another, 4 or 8 years of Kamala Harris, we would have moved a fair amount further down the way there. I mean, obviously, they
No
were
doubt.
already putting pressure on social media outlets to stop that. But one thing is for sure, um, you would have had these other countries go and involve in censorship of Americans inside of America more. I mean, they're talking about huge fines put on X for going and putting out disinformation, equal to like 10% of their worldwide revenue, not just their profits, but their revenue that they would have. Um, there's like no institutions that can survive something like that. Even somebody as wealthy as Elon Musk would have been faced huge pressure to cave into that.
Yeah, John, let's talk about guns now. Let's go into your wheelhouse here. Obviously, your so much of your career has been about gun myths, abolishing gun myths that you talk about, and other things. When it comes to domestic terrorism, and the Obama administration, or excuse me, the Biden administration's plans to stop people from speaking, expressing, planning, coordinating, collaborating, and so on and so forth, just for words. The weapon owners, you would think, would have been the most targeted of this. And you wrote this just toward the end of your piece for Real Clear Politics. This concern about domestic terrorism was used as a basis for advocating a variety of gun control policies, banning assault weapons, again, and high capacity magazines, stop a state adoption of extreme risk protection orders, allowing courts to confiscate people's guns without due process, a national education campaign urging people to lock up their guns, and banning homemade guns, so called ghost guns. John, this again, all based on what people posted or what people said or where they said these things, they were putting, the government, the Biden administration was putting those particular individuals in their crosshairs when it comes to their Second Amendment rights.
Right. Well, I mean, just explicitly, as we talked before, they were targeting symbolism. If you put down 2A or wrote the right to keep and bear arms in social media posts, they viewed that as a proxy for them to, begin to think about classifying you as a potential domestic terrorist, or at least concerning non-criminal activity that's there. So, I mean, it's more than just somebody owning a gun. They were
I
worried
would just
about,
love to see their definition of that, John. I'm sorry to interrupt. I would love to see what did they put in this policy, their definition of non-criminal activity, concerning non-criminal activity. It's not criminal, but it's of concern to us. What the hell did that even mean? Because
well,
owning a gun for personal or family protection is behavior that is concerning but not quite illegal, so therefore we're going to do things to you. I'm blown away by that fact, and I would like to know how they justified it and how it would be written. Or is it just in the eye of the government agencies beholders? Whichever agent says, yeah, I'm concerned about that, you're gone. uh,
right.
was it that simple?
Well, I think it varied. I think there were some things like the explicit discussion that they had about symbolism, like the 2A type thing, that was
Yeah.
explicit. I don't think they explicitly said any place, I don't believe they did on anything about you owning a gun per se that did it. But I'm sure if people own things like what they classified as an assault weapon, and,
So what? Yeah.
you and I know the vagaries of that. Uh, or if you made a homemade gun or something like that, I'm sure that they would, even though people have made homemade guns in the United States from before the time we were even a country, uh, that would be used as proxies for things that were concerning. But, a lot of this, the symbolism, those types of things were explicit. Some of the other things one can just infer from the types of things that, you read that one sentence with regard to what they wanted to go and do about different types of gun control laws. Some of the things are just hilarious. I mean, I don't know whether when somebody locks up their gun and that's going to go, and what does that have to do with stopping domestic terrorism? I'm not exactly sure. Uh, you know, some there are other things
Well,
there too.
clearly, the existence of that gun in the hands of somebody that is right of center on the political spectrum means they may be a domestic terrorist. Clearly, that's what that means, right?
It's one of these areas where it's even bizarre that it's a possibility that something like that could be interpreted that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the only way. It's the only way. I mean, why else would they target these individuals based on, like you said, symbolism or actual ownership? And of course, and I don't want to veer too far off into this on just the gun part of this thing too, but you know, Joe Biden bragged about the first quote unquote assault rifle ban. Or assault weapons ban the first time around, saying that it was so effective. And if I recall from some of the statistics you've put forth, even if they did want to re-implement another one, had they gotten an opportunity, had they held the Congress, had they, the presidential election gone another way, they would certainly still be pushing for a new assault weapons ban. There was no, there was no practical impact of that in the first time around anyway, was there, John?
No, in fact, if anything, it had a pernicious effect. Look, there are studies that were even funded by the Clinton administration, which had put that into effect, which couldn't find any statistically significant evidence to support the claim that there were benefits from them. The vast majority of academic research hasn't found any impact in terms of mass public shootings or in terms of different types of crime that's occurring. And it's to me, it's not particularly surprising. I mean, you ban, I mean, these assault weapon bans. You look at what Dianne Feinstein's staff included in the ban. They had gone through catalogs of guns and basically picked guns based on how they look rather than how they function. Uh, you know, 85% of the guns that are sold in the United States are semi-automatic guns. One pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out, it reloads itself, one pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out, and so on. Um, they just banned some semi-automatic weapons. There were no machine guns that were banned in the 1994 assault weapons ban that was there. These were all just different types of semi-automatic guns. So, you look at some of the ones that people focus on, an AR-15, that's essentially a hunting rifle, a small caliber hunting rifle that on the outside looks like a military weapon. But no, there's no militaries in the world. Even the Associated Press a couple years ago finally came out and said that this was misleading for media outlets to go and call it an assault weapon or to go and call it a military weapon. Uh, you know, Often what people would call it is military style, but the key word there was style, not in terms of how it functions, but just cosmetically how it looked on the outside. They fired the same bullets with the same rapidity, doing the same damage as a small caliber hunting rifle. In fact, most of the states uh, ban people being able to go and use an AR-15 to go and hunt deer because they're concerned that with the small caliber bullet there, the .223, which is just a little bit larger than a 22 caliber, that it would be more likely to wound rather than kill the animal, and that it would just cause suffering. You wanted a larger caliber bullet to make sure that you would be more likely to kill it. Um, but those fine points are kind of lost. And just in general, most mass public shootings don't involve any type of rifle. Only about 17% over the last 25 years involve a rifle of any type solely as the weapon being used there. You look at murders generally in the country, and something less than 3% of the murders in the United States involve a rifle of any type, let alone one of these so-called assault weapons that they want to go and point to. So, it's anyway, it's just yeah. If it wasn't, if they banned assault weapons, so-called assault weapons, I'm sure then they would go and have something else that they would go after. I mean, about 56% of the mass public shootings involve only a handgun, for example. And so I suspect that they'd go after banning those next.
Yeah, that would of course be the obvious thing, and what's really frustrating is when you look at the number of people, and I don't want to dive too much further into this, like I said, because I want to stay on the intelligence side and what they had tried to target during the Biden administration. But just since we're on it, if they want to ban things that are responsible for more deaths, you've seen the list of all of the different types of weapons that have been used to kill, from rifles to handguns to explosives to knives to sticks, rocks, and hands and feet. More people are killed by hands and feet than are by AR-15s, or quote unquote what they like to call assault rifles.
Right.
And so what are they going to do? And how many times do we need to see examples of mass stabbing attacks and machete attacks and things like that in other countries in which guns have been outlawed, and then vehicle attacks in a lot of Western European countries as well? They're just plowing through crowds of people and committing mass murder, but it doesn't. Nobody says, "Boy, that was a terrible assault van that was used to mow down those people." They blame the driver. But when it
Right.
comes to if 8 or 9 people are killed in a gun attack, in an actual shooting spree, it's, boy, nothing to do with the person. It's all about that horrible weapon that they chose.
All right. Well, I mean, you look at the Nice truck attack that occurred, there's more people by a substantial margin that got killed or maimed there than any mass public shooting in the United States.
I
Uh,
forgot about that.
you look at just comparing Western Europe to the United States. You go and ask people over the last, since 2010, could you name me the two worst mass public shootings? Neither one of them occurred in the United States. You have the 2015 Paris concert shooting where 130 people were killed. You have in 2011, you have the Norway attack where, ignoring the
Mhm.
bombing deaths there, you had 67 people that were shot to death. Both of those were substantially worse than the worst mass public shooting. that we've had in the United States, and yet those countries
That
have
was
very
Vegas,
strict.
right? Vegas was our worst here in the
Yeah,
United
yeah, that's
States,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers though.
It was high 50s, but
Okay.
you know, uh, you look at those cases that were there, and France bans semi-automatic guns, and yet the people that engaged in that had machine guns that were there. Um, you know, Norway has regulations for guns too. You know, you look at something like school shootings. Uh, there are a number of countries in Europe on a per capita basis that are worse. You look at Germany, for example. Since 2000, we've had 9 mass public school shootings where 4 more people have been killed. Germany's had 4, but they have 80 million people, and we have 340 million people here. So if you adjust for population, that's like they have had the equivalent of 16, which is more than 9. Or you look at a country like Finland. Finland's had 2 mass public school shootings over that period of time. They have like 5.5 million people. We have 60 times more people. Nobody in the media, I think, would go and compare the murder rate in California with the murder rate in Wyoming, the number of murders. You'd compare the rates of murders in those different places. And so, but for some reason, when they're talking about these mass public shootings, they don't make the adjustments for the population that were there. If you have 2 mass public shootings in a country that has 1/60th the population that we have here in the United States, that would be the equivalent of us having 120 rather than 9 of those. Or Norway, which had 1 mass public school shooting, they had a population that's also about 1/60th the population in the United States. So that would be the equivalent of us having 60 of these. But for some reason, in places like Russia have had many more mass public school shootings and mass shootings than we've had here in the United States, and yet Russia has extremely strict gun control laws
Mhm.
in that country. And so, I mean, you look across these places, and these countries that have higher rates have all the different types of gun control laws and more than what the gun control advocates here in the United States have pushed for, at least openly.
Right. John, we've got just a few minutes left. I want to follow up back to the domestic terrorist threats. How big would you say the actual threat of domestic terrorism really is in the United States? And you can apply that in a number of ways. There was Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett just a couple of days ago, one of her very, very strong racist tirades about white supremacist groups. Talked about how there are more white supremacist killings in the United States than any other murder, which is insane because we all know this is the population numbers as far as murders and by race and so forth. But she did mention the Proud Boys and she mentioned neo Nazis, organizations that have a reputation and a history of being very, very violent. I would sit here and point back and say, I haven't seen too many examples of Proud Boy demonstrations that lead to cops being killed and violence and so on and so forth. The way I did it with Antifa, I see a very, very strong domestic terror threat, that is already there in Antifa, and I see a lot of Islamic fundamentalist groups, that
Right.
can certainly commit terrorist attacks within. So, bigger picture here, when the FBI under Biden categorized, certain Americans as being domestic terror threats, what's the reality of where the domestic terror threats come from in this country, John?
No, it's an excellent question. And look, however you cut it, what she says is completely wrong. If you go and you look at mass public shootings, where we have a lot of data on, you may find about 8% of all the mass public shooters have anything that might be identified as any type of racist type thing, but that could be explicit racism or it could be anti-immigrant. Uh, but the thing is, more than half of those are anti-immigrant because of environmentalist type things, because stuff we were talking about before, where you have these guys that are upset about minorities having too many kids, for example. And you know, so I don't know how you want to go. Are they white supremacists? Yeah, but they're white supremacists from an environmentalist left wing type perspective that's there. Look, if you look generally, and
And
we have,
I'm guessing that those groups would not have been targeted by, and I don't know
oh, I'm sure
specifically
not.
what was in the declassified file by Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm sure they probably were not on the radar of
I,
the
I see,
Biden
I see
administration.
nothing. I see nothing in what was declassified that would indicate that they would have been targeted. Nothing in the leaks that came out. I agree with you. So,
Even though they were legitimate threats, potentially legitimate threats, they got a different type of scrutiny and a
right.
different level of potential punitive, preventative punitive. Say that 5 times fast. Preventative punitive actions for quote unquote non criminal activity.
Right, exactly. Look, I mean, at our website at crimeresearch.org, we break down kind of the political motivations for these mass public shooters that are there. And, you look and you see that the majority of them are white. About 54% over the last 25 years are white. White non-Middle Eastern individuals. But about 60% of the U.S. population is white non-Middle Eastern individuals. So they're actually, even though they're the majority, they're slightly less than their share of the population. You look at Middle Eastern individuals, they make up about 8% of the mass public shooters, even though they only make up about half of 1% of the population. So they're way overrepresented. You look at
Mm-hmm.
something like trans individuals, if you accept these surveys that show about 1% or so of adults in the United States are trans, what you find is they're overrepresented by a factor of about 8 more than their share of the population that's there. So there are, are groups that are overrepresented. If I were to go and say this, I'd say kind of rational discrimination. You may want to have a little bit more concern about Muslims. Obviously, the vast majority of Muslims would never think about doing these types of attacks.
Of
Uh,
course.
and, that goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that there are not going to be certain fringe groups within there that are going to be more disposed towards doing these types of things than others are. And but going after just whites generally, as the types of statements that you're indicating there are doing, they're underrepresented. Whites, I think, make
White conservatives even more so.
right. Look, the vast majority of these mass murderers are not political at all. Huge percentage. I can't remember the exact percent, whether it's like 80% or whatever, uh, are not political in any way. You just have individuals who are suicidal, who at some point along the line realize that they could get attention by killing lots of people. So you have people who are suicidal, feel unappreciated, want to get attention, uh, and have figured out that they can get media attention the more people they kill. You have many of them who go and say things explicitly. If I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get even more media attention. You have people like the Sandy Hook killer, who, according to police, had put together what was the equivalent of a doctoral dissertation looking at mass public shootings over the previous 40 years, where he had, according to one report, graphed out the relationship between the number of people killed and the amount of media attention that people would get in order to try to figure out, convince himself that if he could only kill more people, he could get more media attention. His goal was to kill more people than the Norway killer had killed because he wanted to get even more media attention worldwide than the Norway killer had gotten. And you know, you see these things time after time, and at some point, and one of the things that bothers me and been a real thing that's upset me is just the media just refuses to cover those parts of their diaries and manifestos where they explain why they picked the targets that they did. These guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to get media attention. and they know if they go to a place where victims aren't able to defend themselves, so-called gun-free zones, they're going to be more successful in killing more people and thus getting more media attention. And it seems to me that's a pretty important newsworthy thing for people to keep, to recognize. And my guess is the whole gun control debate that we have right now and this terrorism type discussion would be dramatically different if even once in a while the media would actually cover what I consider to be extremely newsworthy parts of these diaries and manifestos where they explain why they pick the targets that they do.
Yeah, the media is very, very negligent, obviously, and negligent might not even be the right word because that would indicate they just kind of aren't paying attention. They're being intentionally, biased in terms of what they choose to cover and what they choose not to cover, and that's a real big part of this problem too. So I am, and I still can't believe that very, 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 very scant attention has been paid to this declassified plan by DNI Tulsi Gabbard. But John, I'm glad you're on it. We'll spread it as far and wide as we can on this program and on my radio program as well. And we'll send people to crimeresearch.org for more of your great research on Second Amendment issues, gun issues, and so many more things. John Lott, really appreciate the time. Thanks for stopping by again.
Well, thank you very much for being there, Bob. You make a difference. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Strictly Speaking. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to share this with other people in your social media sphere, especially if you found any value at all in what you learned from John Lott today. I know I did. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on Strictly Speaking.